Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today is the culmination of Friends Pitching Fantasy Week. Anyone watching the release schedule closely will notice that this is our third episode this week because it's a very special time in FTF history because we are recording Friends
and FPF
Pitching
history.
Fantasy and FPF history. That's right, both histories. Very critical moment because on Monday, Dylan pitched 3 fantasy books for us to read on the show, and I have to pick one of them today. On Wednesday, I pitched 3 fantasy books to Dylan, and he has to pick one today. And so that way, we'll end up with our 2 next books to read on the show, and then we're going to do our famous audio-only coin flip to determine the order in which we read these 2 books. Dylan, I just have one question for you. Are you ready?
I am ready, and I'm also ready to, I guess, give a spoiler warning for people to turn this down in their headphones if they haven't yet listened to Friends Pitching Fantasy Part 1 and Friends Pitching Fantasy Part 2, because that's where we actually deliver the pitches to each other, and I recommend listening to those before listening to which ones we chose, because it kind of takes some of, I think, the excitement out of Friends Pitching Fantasy to know the answers already, but you don't have to. You could just tune into this to know what we picked. But anyway, turn us down in your headphones if you haven't yet listened to those Part 1 and Part 2 Friends Pitching Fantasy episodes and want to hear the pitches before you know which books we ended up choosing.
Well said, Dylan. And today we have the very exciting yet difficult task of picking which books we're going to read next based off of those pitches that we discussed in Part 1 and Part 2. And before we can do that, we don't have to decide them alone because we opened up the polls on our social media pages to figure out, to help us decide. And I think, Dylan, because, you pitched your books first, I think we should pick from your books now. I think I should pick from your pitches, if that makes sense. So to remind everyone playing along at home, Dylan has 3 pitches, and that is, the first is Blackwing by Ed McDonald. The second is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And you'd think the third book would have wing in it as well, and you'd be like, that's pretty clever, Dylan, but he didn't. But it's a great book, and we love it just as much as the other 2, of course, and that is Powder Mage by Brian McClellan. And with the caveat of we would read the whole trilogy. Yes.
Yes, beginning with Promise of Blood.
Promise of Blood is book 1. So those are the 3 books, Dylan. I have had a week to think about this. I am pretty close to being decided, but I actually have not seen the social media results yet. So as our gatekeeper of all things social here at Friends Talking Fantasy, would you do me and the listeners the honor and the privilege of letting us know how the polls did? Because we did 2 polls for these books, right?
Yes, we did do 2 polls. We did one on Twitter or X, depending on depending on whether you love Elon Musk or not. And the other was on Instagram. We also got a couple emails, actually.
We got a couple write-ins, which is very exciting,
yes,
and I'm sure we'll get into that as we go here. So, Dylan, how did Blackwing, Fourth Wing, and the Powder Mage trilogy hold up in these polls?
All right. Well, let's start on Twitter. And on Twitter, we had a pretty resounding victory for one of these series, but let's start with number 3. Blackwing came in third.
Okay,
with 18% of the vote.
Okay,
not as strong as Blackwing might have been hoping, as Ed McDonald, if he knew this was going on, might have been hoping.
Sure.
But it's a great book. That's why I brought it up. But that's why I usually bring it up as underrated grimdark fantasy.
For sure.
Because maybe not as many people have read as would be great. But number 2 would be Fourth Wing with only 23% of the vote.
Oh, interesting. So Powder Mage ran with it then.
Powder Mage ran away with a resounding 59% of the Twitter vote.
Wow. That's kind of, I was thinking Powder Mage would edge ahead, just all those Grimdark fans, those Sanderson fans that we've been building up all this time, really showed up on Twitter and voted for Powder Mage. So I wasn't sure if Fourth Wing was going to just have such a popular fan base that it was going to dominate, and it's definitely not going to do that. So that's very interesting. But I wonder if Fourth Wing was going to take off, I imagine it would have a higher percentage on Instagram. So I'm kind of curious to see what those Instagram results are.
You would imagine that, Charles, and you might also imagine that Blackwing unfortunately came in third, which was 17% of the Instagram vote. So pretty similar to that 18% on Twitter. But in second place, we have Fourth Wing again, with only 29% of the vote. So slightly more. Slightly more. But that
makes sense. That tracks.
But even so, Charles, that is a resounding victory for the Powder Mage trilogy at 54%. So it had over half the votes in a three-way vote on both social media platforms. I think it does go to show you, I think we've seen this a couple of times, is that we've tailored a particular kind of reader, a particular listenership that makes up the majority of our followers on social media and presumably our listeners. And
especially of the people that follow us that would actually vote, that's even a more dedicated subsection. Right. So yeah, you're 100% right, Dylan. And
they showed up.
I really wasn't sure what Fourth Wing was going to do, because we had a lot of love for Court of Thorns and Roses, especially on Instagram. So it doesn't surprise me that Instagram gave a little bit more love to Fourth Wing. But Dylan, I think you would agree with me when I say that the fans have spoken with Powder Mage across both platforms.
They have definitely spoken. It's also possible that fans of Wings were split between
you split the Wing vote,
Wing-related candidates, and that
leaving Powder Mage to sweep in. You know, Is that what gerrymandering
you might say? Is that a hanging Chad?
But you know what? I was kind of worried that Fourth Wing was going to dominate one of these polls and then had to disappoint a lot of people. So I'm glad that's not necessarily the case. And I'll be honest with you guys, nothing really much has changed since Dylan's initial pitches. I as much as I want to go back into Romantasy because I think it's fun, I think it's too much to ask of our dedicated fans to go back to back Romantasies. So
we had our email write-in was for Blackwing, so maybe that's slightly
and that's Blackwing. The thing, Blackwing gets a lot of write-ins. The comments and then the emails, and then also our recommendation series. It comes up a lot, as you have pitched before. It's a recommendations darling. And it's one of those culty kind of fan bases where it's just because they're not showing up in the votes, does that mean we're missing out on the story,
I'll say, Charles, that, we got that right in for Blackwing. And it's kind of hard to find our email address. So props to anyone who... not that it's difficult to, guess what it might be, but we don't usually say it at the end of shows. So you're all welcome to send us emails. Yeah. So we love hearing from you all when you do. And we heard from this person, and not only did they vote for Blackwing, they also told us not to go with Fourth Wing. So maybe we take a vote away.
Right. It doesn't surprise me that there is a percentage of our fan base that is please no. All the Abercrombie fans, all the Sanderson fans, which is
they did reference Abercrombie fans don't read that.
So I'm not going to drag this out much longer, Dylan. To me, honestly, Fourth Wing, I think we come back to it, but too much Romantasy back to back, and the votes aren't clamoring for it, so I feel comfortable removing it from the drawing, which leaves us with the poll favorite Powder Mage and the underdog the
Dark Horse
cult favorite, the Dark Horse of Black Wing. And these are both books that I've really, really wanted to read for a long time. But Dylan, there's just one to me that's been part of this world, part of this lineup that I just have put on the TBR for over a decade now, I guess, since this book came out. So I gotta pick it today, and I'm going with Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. That's what I'm going to pick. I would love to read Black Wing and Fourth Wing, but you can't. Powder Mage just broke the mold on this one, ran away with the votes. It was the one I was leaning towards from the beginning anyway, so thank you everyone that voted for validating my instincts on that. I'm not going to go against you guys. I'm picking Powder Mage by Brian McClellan. Let's go! Let's go!
Yeah, I think you made a wise choice here, Charles. You can never go wrong with going with the one that runs away in the polls.
Oh, yeah.
It sounded like afterward you weren't gonna go with Fourth Wing. You kind of made that clear, barring just overwhelming
an absolute
clamoring.
blowout, yeah, which is always possible with a book that popular. Always.
If we went on TikTok, it probably would have run away with
yeah,
it. But we're only on the Gram and the X, and it was not going to happen for Fourth Wing.
Powder Mage feels like a return to form for us.
It does.
It's like the School of Sanderson, the grim dark Ella Abercrombie, the hard magic, the soft magic. Like, let's go back to that. A little bit of return to form. So I'm excited for that as well, and I hope the listeners and everyone that voted is excited as well.
Well, I think you'll have satisfied a lot of people here because I think this is the biggest runaway we've probably had in
That's a big lead.
History.
I mean, we've had ties, dude, like
platforms.
30 almost on a lot of these. I think the last one we did, we had like an absolute tie for
I think we did have one that was essentially all in the low 30s, or like low to mid 30s in terms of the split. I think it was mine last time.
Yeah, I remember. I kind of remember you having to pick. Yeah, I remember the polls being of zero help for you last time. I don't remember what the results were, but I remember them being like tied and close. And I think you're gonna have something similar today. I don't know what the poll results are, but I look at these books that I pitched for you, and I don't envy you your choice right now. And hopefully the poll results have come in and helped give you a little clarity. But before we reveal the poll results, I think we need to mention what these books are. So we're going to read the Powder Mage trilogy. That is what I've picked from Dylan's pitches. Now Dylan gets to pick from my 3 pitches. And to remind everyone listening at home, my 3 pitches were Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, The Gunslinger, book 1 of the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and then Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. 3 big picks, and it was Friday the 13th when I made these pitches, so there's a little bit of a spooky theme going on amongst these. And Dylan, what were the poll results?
Yeah, let's get those poll results for everyone. Let's start with Twitter here, and we had in third place we had Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. And that was at 26% of the vote. And that's near 30. That's tough because that's near 30. That's fair. We next up had The Gunslinger by Stephen King at 29% of the vote, which leaves us with the winner of the Twitter poll at 45% of the vote, and that's Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. How do we say it, Charles?
Muir, I think.
Muir? Okay.
I tried to listen to a couple book talks, and I think they're saying Muir. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Muir. Tamsin Muir. We'll get that sorted out for sure by the time we're covering it. But it sounds like, Charles, you did your research. That's all we can ask.
If book talk can be counted as research, then I did that. And I gotta say, my initial reaction is Between Two Fires got a little shortchanged. I can see why it's a bit of a deep cut, But I was most excited about that one. So it didn't get totally annihilated. It seems to kind of be within a couple percent
We'll wait
of
for the
second place.
Instagram.
Oh, wait for the Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
excited. Let me hear the Instagram.
Are you excited? I don't know if
I
I'm going to be
am.
excited because in third place is Between Two Fires with 13% of the vote on Instagram.
No.
Yeah. And we love Christopher Buehlman's work. And I will say, Charles, you're talking about how excited you were about it. This was the one that after I heard your pitches, I was the most like, ooh, like that premise. That sounds really interesting. And like, what? I don't know. That one I think brought out
That was
the
my
most
best pitch for sure.
excitement yeah, it was your best pitch. Brought the most excitement. It was kind of the freshest, I guess, just by nature of like, it's horror, so it's a little different. It felt like it could be a breath of fresh air. So it's yeah, which is tough to say about something that involves fires. You'd expect the air would not be pretty fresh around that, but you'd be surprised, Charles.
You'd be
And
surprised.
you would. So I don't know. You seemed really passionate about it. I think that kind of kindled something in me, if you will, Charles. And
You could
that's-
still
that's
pick
the-
it. You could
could.
still pick it.
I could.
It's third and across both results, but we don't know what second or first are, for Instagram.
I do. So I'll tell you. Second was The Gunslinger with 37% of the vote. And that leaves the winner across both polls. Gideon the Ninth, 50% of the vote here.
That's a blowout, too.
That's
that's
relatively-
very similar results to mine.
Yeah,
Makes sense
relatively
because it's like a
resounding,
New
not
York
quite
Times
at your-
best-selling series now, right? So it's just at the front of everyone's minds. It's the hottest property of which we're discussing right now by a long shot. So that kind of makes sense. The question is, are you going to go with the hottest property, Dylan? Like, what are you going to do?
Let me talk you through my thought process. You already heard about Between Two Fires, and I think if you just right at the end of the episode, which is what we used to do, we didn't even go to polls at all, if I remember correctly.
Nope.
You'd pitch, I pitch, we'd both pick, and then the legendary audio only coin flip would take place and decide which one we would read next of the two. And I think if it was old format, I think I just would have jumped right in because it was the last thing you pitched. You were so excited, and I was excited, and just be like, all right, let's do it. But Charles, I just think that it's not fair. I'm a man of the people. Let's lead with that. I mean, it's important to me to serve our listener base. If I want to read Between Two Fires, Charles, maybe I'll just go ahead and do that. I have that option. But
Yeah.
I'm a content creator, Charles, and it is incumbent
Oh, you are
upon me. Yeah. And it's incumbent upon me to do what is best for our listeners. And to go with something that got 13% of the vote on Instagram, I mean, I'm not saying I have to choose the exact winner.
You could argue that the listeners don't know what they want, though. That's the thing. It's like,
but do they want a spoiler-filled episode on something they haven't read? Is that what they want?
I mean, it's an excellent question, but think about those people that have read Between Two Fires. They're gonna go crazy for this episode.
Yeah, I'm sure all 13% of them would. But I don't know. We're gonna read it, Charles. I might just grab that book, and that might end up getting like an expedited read. If you're excited about it, I'm excited about it. Maybe we'll just read it, and it's not unprecedented, but it's not going to be among our next two. I'm just gonna tell you that right here, Charles. And
Fair. All right.
It's because I'm a man of the people.
But now, Dylan, you have two choices now: the man of the people, the runaway vote. But you have also said multiple times how much you've wanted to read The Gunslinger and how much you wanted to start The Dark Tower. So, as much as you're a man of the people, are you a man of yourself?
Am I a man of myself? Great question, Charles, and one that totally makes sense. I'll say, so The Gunslinger competed a little bit more here. It was, it was I would say, been solidly, it was down by 16% on Twitter and 13% on Instagram, but not to the point where I think I would be doing some sort of disservice to the listeners as a man of the people if I were to select it. And I'll say that it's the one that's been just sitting, just burning a hole in my TBR for like basically since I started reading fantasy. And
Right.
It's one of those series that I think you said, Charles, I don't know if you said this on the air or off the air, but on the R fantasy, like the fantasy subreddit.
That was on the air. That was part of the pitch.
Yeah, it was on the air. It is the highest book up there on their top 25 rankings of series. It's a top book on there or series that we have not covered at all. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's a few books in there maybe that creeped in, but by far the biggest series that we haven't read or discussed on the show.
Yeah. And
the number one, and that's kind of how I first landed on it. You know, I was like, of all the popular stuff, what haven't we read or recorded a conversation on yet? And that was the first one to come up.
Yeah.
And it was done. We've done a good job. So it's like, this is the big one, you know? I mean, we've never talked about Game of Thrones or Harry Potter or whatever, but I mean, this is in that mix.
Yeah, it's one that definitely needs to be in our backlog at some point. Like, you need to be able to go to Friends Talking Fantasy in the same way that you can find, oh, here's their Mistborn episode, although that was a long time ago and it kind of sucks. Or
only in that it was like our second episode ever, and we just can't bear to listen. And people like it though. People download it and listen to it.
That's fair. Or you could say, oh, look, there's a Kingkiller Chronicle episode, which doesn't suck. Like our first episode that doesn't suck, maybe.
That's fair.
Then, or, name Lord of the Rings or whatever else, right? Poppy War, a beloved series.
Beloved.
I would say that you want to have this book in there. But then on the other side, Charles, we've got the darling of our current time here. We've got a book where
well said.
I believe you said the final installment is coming out relatively soon. It's on the tip of people's tongues. Gideon the Ninth. And I'll also say there's this thing that you can't entirely quantify, which, I mean, I guess you could quantify comments. You could say there are this many comments that said that. But, within reason. There's something
the writings, though, they hit different.
Easily. They do hit a little bit different. And, I got a Discord message for Dark Tower. We got email for Dark Tower, I believe, too. But if you take a look on Twitter, Charles...
Yeah.
It's just comment after comment about Gideon the Ninth. I mean, we've got...
Wow.
I mean, besides, we do have one person lashing out, rightfully, I believe, against you for attacking the English people in our previous
Who said
episode?
It was me? Like, I don't remember attacking the English people.
You did.
I don't remember. I love our English fans. Our favorite authors, many of them come from England.
It was part of
Tolkien, our founding father.
Thing. Like, you were like, oh, yeah, it's great to have a New Zealand
I was leaning
author.
pretty hard into the New Zealand aspect of this pitch. Yeah.
Of Gideon the Ninth. That's a Kiwi author. You were like, at least it's not another British fantasy author. And I had to rein things in. It got almost
but that's
very
not
derogatory.
That's not to speak against our lovely British fans.
You've alienated our English listeners.
We've won some of them back over. Some of them.
Some of them. This person did say that they like you, or maybe they meant they like me. Anyway, they said Gideon.
They like the proverbial you, as in the profile of the show,
I couldn't tell.
which encompasses both of us.
I couldn't tell if it was the royal you, which would make sense as a British person, but
right.
Or if it was
as they often do.
But then we've got no question, it has to be Gideon. We've got We've got Gideon the Ninth is wild in the best way. We've got Gideon with a bunch of exclamation points. We do have one between two fires. Rules. Oh. Oh no!
I got you.
I've done that like maybe twice in 200 something episodes.
The comments got you.
The comments got me because I was just reading it. But for the most part, we've just got a bunch of Gideon comments. And to see that on top of the high percentage for Gideon the Ninth in the votes, to see the passion, to see how much people seem to have it on the tip of their tongues right now and how much it's just present in the fantasy sphere, I think that Dark Tower is always going to be there, right? It's going to hit the spot that it's going to be in, and the excitement's going to kind of hang around where it is. And those Dark Tower fans, I think they're willing to hang around and to listen to this episode when they get
Dylan,
the
it
chance.
sounds like you've made your choice here. Is this so?
It sounds like I'm going to have to pick Gideon the Ninth to be our next read of your pitches. I just think, Charles, this was not where I thought I was going to go. But
wow.
I'm a man of the people. I have to go with what you folks want. And especially, I have to make sure that any English listeners who felt hurt by you, Charles, I have to do what's right by them. So from what I can gather, Gideon the Ninth is the way to do that. And I hope all the folks who are excited about Gideon are excited to hear us do a deep dive into this one. And maybe, who knows, maybe we end up liking it so much we keep going with the series and we might be able to time out the release of the final installment with coverage of it, which is also good. You know, it's topical, Charles. We'll get to the Dark Tower.
The timing of it is really convenient, and that's part of why I pitched it. I was running around different bookstores considering what to pitch, and this one caught my eye. I kind of remember the lesbians in space kind of premise, necromancers and stuff, and I was like, okay. And then it's like, oh wow, the last one's coming out. So it's like all these stars were kind of aligning. So I think you made a great choice. You are a man of the people, after all, and a New Zealand author. How could we not, at the end of the day? So
plus two
I think you made the right
fantasies
choice.
at the same time after we've done none in the entirety of the show would be interesting with Gunslinger, and
it will definitely be an era for sure, but we'll have plenty to do with the Powder Mage trilogy across the whole series. So I'm really excited about these picks between the Powder Mage trilogy with Brian McClellan and then Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I will mention also, we're talking about the Dark Tower kind of running its course. Did you know? And I was just looking this up quickly because I was like, oh, maybe there's always a film adaptation in the works, right? Or TV series or something. Amazon had the rights, gave up on them around 2019, 2020. And Mike Flanagan, who, if you don't know, he did The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor. His latest show, House of Usher, came out last week, has the rights to the Dark Tower series currently right now, and he plans to make a series out of it at some point. So, I mean, Midnight Mass is one of my favorite modern TV post-2020 TV shows, like hard stop. Midnight Mass is brilliant. I love Haunting of Hill House also. So this was December 2022 when Mike Flanagan announced he had acquired the rights to develop a TV series based on the books and has plans for a multi-series release. Could be years away. You know what? We have time. And maybe there comes a time when that show gets more traction. If Mike Flanagan is also so hot right now, and if he were to come out with the Dark Tower series, everyone would be interested in it. So there will be another time and place for the Dark Tower trilogy. I agree, and I think he's just gonna have to continue burning that hole in your TBR, and that only will just make the anticipation that much higher, which will make the day we read it that much more sweet. Yeah. But for now, we got to put it beside us because we got to focus on the books at hand, my friend. Of course, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Very excited to read that, and then the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. Two very strong showings. the fan favorites. This is what the people wanted. Great matchup. How do you feel about this matchup? This lineup, I should say. It's not a matchup.
Oh, I thought you were trying to get my opinions on who would win the audio only coin toss. But how do I feel about the lineup? I feel fantastic. I think that, first of all, I think anytime we're going with what most of our listeners and followers want is a positive. I always feel good about that. And second, I would say, I couldn't have gone wrong with the ones that you brought to the table, Charles.
Likewise.
And that goes to show with I really didn't think I was going to pick Gideon the Ninth, but it's so, it's so popular.
The fans had a clear voice on that one.
Yeah.
And that's why we opened it up to the fans. I think that's a great addition to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited. And then Powder Mage Trilogy, I haven't read that in so long. So this will be one of those experiences of where it starts to kind of be almost a new book, Right. You can, if you go that long without reading something, you reread it, there's parts where you're like, oh yeah, I remember this. But I think I have such a different perspective on the fantasy genre now. I've read so much more since then.
And now reading it post the beginning of FTF, it's just another perspective that you come into these reads with that sometimes having read it once before helps with that. So super interested. It's always good when we can get two perspectives of the reread and the first time read, like we did with Farseer Trilogy. That was really nice to have your perspective for the second and third book, and then my perspective having reread it entirely, knowing what the end is going to be. So it'll be nice to have those two perspectives. And the only other thing left to do now is say, well, Dylan, we have these two great books, but which one are we going to read next? I mean, you picked one, I picked the other. What's the order, though? It seems arbitrary to just pick one. So I think we need to do one of our internationally famous audio only coin flips. People around the world, hundreds, have heard the flipping of the coin, the spinning in the air, the calling.
Odd to think, but yeah.
So here's what we're gonna do. We're recording on Zoom. I'm gonna share my screen for Dylan so that he can see the coins, so he knows that there's no funny business here. So let's go ahead and share that.
No, an audio only format coin flip. I mean,
Dylan, can you confirm that you see the screen, that you see the coin?
I do indeed see the coin. It is currently on tails.
It automatically flips it when you search it on Google. I just Google coin flip. So now, Dylan, since I'm the one that's flipping, I think it's only fair that you're the one that calls it in the air. And I think if it lands on what you call, we read your book. And if it lands on the opposite of what you called, we read mine. What do you think about that?
Can you clarify, is my book the book I pitched or the book I chose?
Yeah, so if you call the coin correctly, we will read Powder Mage first. Gotcha. And if you call the coin incorrectly, we will read Gideon the Ninth. I think is how we should do it. Right?
Yeah, I feel like Shedeur Sanders, Deion Sanders' son, stepping up to call the coin flip in overtime against Stanford, I believe it was, last weekend.
This is,
I feel ready.
The second biggest coin flip moment this week.
Lost. Colorado did lose after that, so we'll see how this goes.
So we're going to narrate this to you guys live right now. The excitement in the air is palpable. Dylan, can you feel it?
I can feel it.
The air is electric. I've got my finger on the mouse over the flip again button on the Google page for a coin flip. Dylan, visualize your call. Call it in the air. The coin is being flipped for the future of what we're going to read next on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Sure. In 3, 2, 1. The coin has been flipped.
Tails never fails.
Tails never fails. It's Tails. That means we are reading the Power Mage trilogy next.
Yes.
Powder Mage,
don't you worry, fans of Gideon the Ninth, because right up after, I assume, Charles, we're just going to read the first book of Powder Mage, and then we'll go Gideon, and then we'll
I think that's fair.
that's-
Yeah, take a break from Powder Mage and then come back and kind of just bounce around. And who knows? Maybe we'll read a certain book that we wanted to read after that, and then we'll read the third book of Powder Mage. Like, who
it's
knows?
between two series.
If we happen to read a book between two other books of two series,
we
two
gotta
books.
find some fire book to read during that time.
I wonder which one we'll read between two other fire series as well. A book between two fire series. Who knows? But anything's possible, and that's what makes this show great. And another Friends Pitching Fantasy in the books, as they say, Dylan. And I'm so glad we got to spend this week together talking a bunch of really great fantasy books. We win no matter what, and that's what's super fun about these. Thank
Unlike
you to
Colorado
everyone that
against
voted.
Stanford.
Yes, it's true. And you know what? I think we came out stronger than ever before. So, Dylan, unless there's anything else we want to say, I think it's time to play that sweet, sweet outro music.
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you're excited for the Powder Mage trilogy, if you're excited for Gideon the Ninth, let us know over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and at the FTF Podcast with number 1 at the end on Twitter, /X, whatever you want to call it. And Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following and engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify. Just 2 clicks over the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, and it helps us so much when you do that. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts, and that means you could write nice stuff about us and toss in 5 stars to our podcast. Anytime we see one of those reviews, it puts a smile on my face and presumably on Charles's face as well. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you all. Dylan well said. Just listening is more than enough. Puts a smile on all of our faces. So thank you for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.